So, Congressman, first just kind of tell me how the baseball game was last night and kind of what that experience was like.
In some instances, it was about the same as the other two I was at. You're on a major league field. You know, there's a lot of excitement with the music, the video, there's the colors, the sensory all around you. Yesterday was a little surreal at the same time, just realizing that literally less than 2 days earlier, a few hours earlier, many of the folks on that field were scrambling for their lives. And there was a sense of appreciation just for being at the field that we didn't have before. It was, we walked on the field winners by just being there. The outcome of the game wasn't near as important to us as it had been in the past. Most of our players were already emotionally and physically exhausted when we got on the field. We're a much better baseball team than what was there last night, but many of the players like myself were dealing with either no sleep or just 2 or 3 hours of sleep. Of course, in an instance like that, anybody's been in a combat situation will tell you, as soon as you close your eyes, you're hearing the cracks of the guns, you're seeing the bodies laying on the ground, you're hearing the screams, and so it's kind of difficult to get that out of your mind. So most of our players that were on the field at practice all said they were encountering the same thing.
What were sort of the last couple of days like in D.C.?
Well, I mean, that morning started off like any other morning. I was up at 5:30. There was a few things different, but nothing that stood out. My chief of staff drove me over to the field, which we normally do. I got there about 6:20. Immediately ran out on the field to put my cleats on, went out on the field. After I dropped my gym bag in the dugout, had a half-gallon or a gallon jug of water that I brought, just the water jugs, like a milk jug, and threw it in the dugout. Went out on the field and started warming up. Really did a short warm-up, went out into the outfield, and the coach started hitting outfield to us. After that, I went over to the batting cage, and I hit a few times in the batting cage. So about 7 o'clock, I decided to go on to the main field to where the fielders were in the field, and we had a pitcher throwing live pitching. It was a staff member. We take the younger guys who can still throw hard. And went out there. I dropped by the dugout to put my mitt, or to grab something out of my, I got a drink of water. Ran up onto the field and I put my helmet on. And probably within 30 seconds of that's when I heard the first shot ring. I knew it was a gunshot. I recognized it as a rifle shot, but in that environment, you're processing. There was a long pause after it, so it made me think maybe there was a misfire, somebody was cleaning a weapon or something, but there's a parking lot and a YMCA across the street, and that's when I looked at the detail, the security detail that was there with the whip, the Scalise. And they were exiting their vehicles with looks on their face like, what was that? It was about maybe 30 seconds when I think it was Gary Palmer of Alabama, who was at shortstop. I heard him say, "Got a gun." At that point, everybody started breaking for the first base side because the shot came from over the third base side. And most everybody went to the dugout. I opted to go outside of the field. I wanted to have a place where I could get my eyes on the shooter and also determine what the next step was, plan an escape route. And as I was running off the field, the ground was erupting by my feet with the bullets actually hitting the ground, and maybe 2 hit. Apparently Scalise was hit by one of the shots. There were maybe a dozen shots fired from the time I broke from home plate to go out the gate. It's hard to remember all that, but there were several shots fired. One, apparently, I heard a metal tinging sound as I was going through the gate. Indication was he was targeting me. Of course, I was wearing a KSU jersey, so it's bright yellow, and my size makes a pretty large target. But so when I got around the corner of a wooden shed where I decided to get behind it, is when I saw Matthew Micah was shot in the chest, and he was laying on his back about 10 feet in front of that shed. I tried to go up to him when more shots hit the ground, and I knew that every time we'd try to get up there, we'd get driven back. So there were several others around that shed with me, and there was a time when he stopped firing because he was repositioning, and we told them, there was some staff members and other members of Congress there, to go to the concrete bathroom that was about 30 yards behind us to the left. That was a much safer location. We're just in a little wooden shed, and he's firing high-powered rounds. So they took off, but myself and another individual staff member named Brian Kelly decided we were going to stay there to try to help Matt. And that's where we stayed through the rest of the gunfight.
Did you ever get a look at the shooter?
I did. Brian kept his eyes on the shooter once he worked his way down the fence from the third base side, and he got behind home plate. He had a clear line of up the third base side. We actually had some of our players, some members of Congress, decided, because the dugout was pretty full with infielders, a lot of the guys in the outfield, which we have some of the younger staffers out there, they decided to go over the fence, I think. We had a lot of injuries that weren't gunshots. We had cut legs, and Roger Williams, our coach, got a broken ankle when he dove into the dugout. Of course, there was one individual staffer shot as he was getting in the dugout, shot in the calf, and they were able to tend to him, which was difficult, because if you think of this as a traditional dugout that's made out of concrete, and those bullets ricochet around in there, and he was shooting into the dugout. And so it made it even difficult for him to treat him. But we had a couple that got behind the dugout, but they were sandwiched between the back wall of the dugout and a fence. And then they realized as he was working his way down, they were in a direct line of fire, so they went around into the dugout, and those guys were trapped in there. Finally, I knew where he was because Brian was telling me, and we were also shouting to the Capitol Police officers his location. When we stayed in position until the first police officer was shot. She went down behind their vehicle, the SUV, the Suburban, that was parked about 20 feet parallel in front of me, or perpendicular. I was looking at the side, the passenger side. Matthew Micah was about 10 feet from it, well, maybe 5 feet from it, laying on the ground, so it looked like he was protected, but the shooter started trying to shoot underneath the vehicle. And that's when the bullet hit the ankle of the female officer, and then another bullet actually hit Matt in the arm while he was laying there. Which that one, I owe Matt, that one would have come to me from the trajectory if it had not hit him. When the Alexandria police arrived, the first officer, female officer, came out of the car and was heading through the parking lot where my chief of staff was, and he turned and shot at her. She backed down, she returned fire. At that point, well, before that, the male officer moved away from the Suburban again and drew the fire away from us. He was trying to get an angle to take out the shooter. And he was incredibly brave is what he was doing. I saw something hit his pants leg, and I realized he had gotten hit. Apparently he got hit with some shrapnel, hitting off a tire wheel or something, but he was injured. My thought then was, if he goes down, then we're in real trouble. And so we're trying to analyze what's going on, and the only thing I could think to do was, with the female officer down, if he goes down, Brian and I are going to try to get over there and get her gun. But then we saw Alexandria arrive, and so we wanted to clear the area of fire. So I went back about 10 yards behind me was an oak tree. And I went and got behind it, and that gave me a better field of view. At that point, the gunman was operating back and forth two sides of a concrete utility building where they keep a lot of the sports equipment that was right behind home plate. He would come around to my left side and fire at the police officers and move back over to the right and get a fire, try to fire up our way. Then apparently he either ran out of ammo, his gun jammed or something. He came around the right side, from my perspective, the right side, with a handgun. He was very casual. He just walked out, he turned, and he shot at the male officer, David, a couple of times. They then started hollering to him. The Alexandria police officer was there as well. They were hollering at him, put the gun down, put the gun down. He took another shot, heard a couple shots ring out. I saw him step backwards, and then another shot, and he just fell down. So actually, I saw when he was hit, when he hit the ground. I immediately ran up to where Matt was laying and knelt down with him, trying to assess. I was surprised he was still alive by the amount of blood he lost. He had a significant size hole in the center of his chest. He had been shot in the chest. Since he was still with us, I figured it didn't hit the heart, but he had lost a tremendous amount of blood. It was all over. And all I could think to do right then was just pray for him. And so I put my hand on his head and said a prayer and turned around and looked at the officer, and I asked her where she was hit, and she showed me her ankle, and I realized that wasn't as critical as Matt was, so I asked if she had a medical kit. I went in the back of the SUV, I found the medical kit. By the time I got the medical kit and got back around, EMTs were already heading down the hill. Of course, they were waiting, but they couldn't come down with an active shooter, so the EMTs came down and took care of Matt and started working on her. That's when I realized that Scalise had been shot early on in the attack. He was laying out in the outfield. He'd been actually shot at behind second base, but crawled, drug himself. His shot in the hip is immobilized, but he drug himself into the outfield. Brad Winstrup is a member of Congress who's Colonel Winstrup. He's also an Army medic, served some combat time. He immediately had sprinted out there, him and Senator Jeff Flake, and started tending to Scalise. So I took the med kit and ran out and gave it to Brad because the EMTs were not out there yet. When I got out there, the male officer who was part of Scalise's detail was already, and he had even wounded, he was already out there checking on Scalise after he had taken down the shooter. And I could tell he was injured. So I asked him if he needed help off the field, and he just kind of nodded, he probably did, but instead of putting his arm around me, he just grabbed hold of my shirt and put some weight on it. And so at that point, they took us up to the tennis court there, and a flurry of law enforcement was on scene by then and just started questioning, getting everybody together. I started talking to some of my colleagues and staff members who were clearly showing some evidence of trauma at that point, just being traumatized by it. And so,
at what point did you process what had just happened, the fact that somebody had actually come out to this baseball field to target Congressman?
It was ongoing. From the moment I heard the first shot, my mind started analyzing what was that. That's why I instinctively looked over to the security detail. The shot came from my left. I'm standing with my back to the backstop at home plate. I looked to the left. I didn't see anything, but I heard the shot because what took so long from the first shot, apparently he got out of his vehicle, which was parked over there by the YMCA, and as he was walking up, he took the first shot. Then he didn't take the next shot till he actually got to the fence. I was processing all that. When I saw them getting out, I knew they didn't accidentally shoot, or I thought maybe they had shot somebody, you know. But I saw both of them getting out of their vehicle. What I heard was not what was said, but what I heard was shotgun, but it was actually, he's got a gun. So I started sprinting toward the opening in the fence on the first base side, but realizing as I'm hearing the shots go, that's not a shotgun. And then when I see the bullets impacting the dirt around me, that's no shotgun, that's a pretty high-powered rifle. Semi-automatic is how the frequency of the shots going and the number that he was shooting. So you're continually processing. You're processing, okay, this guy's he's shooting and he's targeting us. Because there were civilians. After a while, I saw a female who's just out there walking her dog was laying on top of her two dogs, you know, screaming, somebody help me, somebody. She never took a shot at them. He was targeting those who had been on the field. So, you know, you're continually processing what I do at this moment. So I think that kind of helped with the post effects of the attack. Is my mind was continually working and processing what's the next thing, and that helps to not panic in that situation too.
So how about now? What's kind of going through your mind now that you've had a lot of time to think about it?
You know, different emotions are happening at this point. This morning, I finally got a decent night's sleep last night. I've had last night at the ball game, Brian Kelly, who was there at the shed with me through the whole thing, we had a chance to talk. He called a friend of his who was a Navy SEAL, and he told him some things to do. I went back to the field yesterday. We had no gear. All of our gear for the baseball game was still out on the practice field. We had no bats, no helmets, no gloves, and my chiefs of staff car was there. And they called and said they were going to take him over there, and I decided to go. My wife went, my daughter and son-in-law rode over there. They didn't get a chance to go up to the field, but I went up there where the FBI was doing the investigation and was talking to the FBI agent, and I was kind of giving him an account of what I saw, and he said, "Where were you?" And I told him that I was by that shed, and And he indicated that that was some of the highest intensity of fire right in that area, and that's why I had a really good view. But he told me after that, he said, it'll help if you go back and you recount every minute, every instant of this thing. And so I started writing it all down, but then go back and think of it in black and white. It'll make it seem distant and older. But at this point, I'm just going through it. You know, that kind of opens up some emotions and thoughts that you have suppressed during that time period. But I'm sure there's going to be some more emotional reaction, but it's good to get out of there. I think it was good for me to go back to the field. I've got a lot of friends that's been in combat. We've been talking. And so, you know, it doesn't help to go back and think, what if? You know, what if I had done this? What if there's nothing you could do any different than what was there? You can assess it to say, next time I'll be better prepared. But, you know, you try to avoid those things.
As a legislator, as sort of a public figure in a contentious time, did you ever envision something like this happening? Had that ever gone kind of through your mind?
You always think of that because just in the position that you have, and it's nothing no different, they're better than anybody else, you know. I get up the same as you, have a family. There's no difference other than a title and a responsibility, but having that today elicits emotions in people, irrational emotions, and by some very unstable people who want to lash out at an idea or something that they have built in their mind, and you are the object they're after. They don't know me. They don't know my grandkids. They don't know the type of person I am. But he was targeting something that had been built in his mind, that he had created to be evil. And he acted out in evil against that, but he did it against human beings. And we have assessed that. We have some security folks on our staff that are continually analyzing, that are training. And it was some of the training that I received from him that kicked in. That's why I did not go into the dugout, because I remember him saying that's a killing box. It's concrete all the way around and the bullets ricochet. I immediately thought of that when that was a bad place to be. It makes you more aware. I don't think I'm going to be scared to go to anything like that, but I am already seeing myself looking around a little more. When I got on the plane to fly in today, as you can tell, I just came from the airport. I was looking at more people, you know, and I think it's an area that we have to be more cautious. But I can tell you this, I never want to be in a gunfight like that again, but if I am, I want to have a gun. I want to be able to fight back.
Yeah, you mentioned that shortly after it happened. From that perspective, what can we sort of learn from this?
I think we have to reassess our fear of guns, of handguns, which have always been used by those that are good for protective purposes, for sporting purposes. They're only used for evil by those who perpetuate evil. If it wasn't a gun, it'd be a car, it'd be a knife, it would be a pressure cooker. In fact, there's been more people killed through terrorist attacks other than guns than actually using guns. To prohibit somebody from being able to protect themselves in an instance like this is putting lives at risk. Virginia, you can have a gun, but my apartment's in Washington, D.C., which says it's illegal. Had there been a handgun in my chief of staff's car, he would have shot Scalise. He would have probably shot Matt. He wouldn't have shot those two officers, because my chief of staff was parked at an area where he could have gotten a shot right into the back without being seen. And if in Georgia, either he would have had a gun in that car or I would have had a gun in that car. There's some of our members at this point that weren't even on that field who you wouldn't consider to be strong conservatives, who have already come out and said they're never going anywhere anymore without carrying a weapon. We shouldn't be making it harder for people to protect themselves. The more dangerous the world gets, the more we need to understand the idea of why our founders put the Second Amendment in the Constitution. It's not a radical idea. It's a personal protection and safety idea. Look, I have the utmost respect for our law enforcement. but there were more law enforcement investigating that scene than there were engaged in protecting it, just because they can't be there everywhere at all times.
If Capitol Police had not been there, what do you think would happen?
We would be having a lot of funerals at this point. I would have a widow and 2 granddaughters that would just know of pictures of their grandfather. There would be a lot of those stories today.
Do you think it's possible for all congressmen, senators, Republicans, to have, security detail? So that
It's impractical with 435 members of Congress. I don't know that it's practicable to have a security detail for everyone. I think we need to reassess when we do have security details. What is that number of elected officials in one location, especially congressmen? If we travel in mass, in other words, we go to certain events around DC or even out of DC, sometimes we travel by bus. If there's 15 or 20 of us, we usually have a security detail with us, either a motorcade, or recently we've taken the train to New York City for a conference, and there was 20 of us together. Capitol Police actually escorted us. We have traveled in the past to where they actually motorcaded us to Union Station, and it was pretty high profile. They've changed a lot of that now to where, because of the threats we've been getting, because of some of the movements that are out there that are advocating organized resistance that sometimes incites violence. They're not calling on violence, but some of the actions that we've seen have caused some people to act. Even in some of the protests that have taken place at our offices has attracted some that weren't part of that movement, but clearly didn't have the same intention of just quietly protesting. You don't want to attract that as much, but we do have security that follows us. But just when you're out on your own, there's no security. I don't know that there should be, but there should be a way that we could secure ourselves. So I think we need to reassess our security policy. I think we need to reassess that when we are places like this, when you have 25 members of Congress, Republicans, and we know it's a very dangerous time, simply because there's a lot of hatred out there for Congress right now. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and it's a lot of the political environment. But until we get that settled, there has to be a way that we have a higher profile of security, because sometimes just having a uniformed or non-uniformed officer with you is enough deterrence.
As a society, knowing what we know about the shooter and some things that he had said and done before this, is there a lesson here for us as a society, do you think? There
is, and we have to reassess how we handle these. There have been posts on our Facebook or social media against me that were as bad and some even worse than what we saw in there. So it's very difficult because some people are just acting out of emotion. Social media has been good in certain areas, but it has also created a lot of keyboard cowboys. A lot of people that are very brave behind the keyboard, but if you ever meet them face to face, they're not quite as courageous or not quite as aggressive. But then there are those that are. And how do you assess that? How do you determine which ones are those that will do what this guy did versus those who are just angry? We need to figure out how to do that. We analyze a lot of this. The Capitol Police does some background investigations whenever there's a post on our social media that seems like it could be a threat, or we get a phone call. There's certain keywords and things that we can. A lot of times you can assess who's just mad and then who is actually potential of a threat. But still, with 435 members of Congress, the Capitol Police are overwhelmed, especially with some political issues that have happened lately. They basically told us we can't process all these, and so they said you're going to have to do some of the work yourself. As
Democrats and Republicans in D.C., do you have to do anything differently moving forward, do you think, to keep this kind of thing from happening? Is there anything you can do to do that?
Well, we have to take our differences, and look, Our nation's strengths are differences, different ideas. Look, America's in a mess. With the issues that we've been fighting for, the ones I fight are policy-based, not politically based. Healthcare is broken. I mean, if you honestly assess where it's going, it's not sustainable. The people who need the insurance will not be able to have the insurance. We bring another idea, an idea that's based on time-tested values of supply and demand, of getting the government out of the way, of the free market, actually competition bringing in. Let's argue on the base of political philosophy, ideas and policy, not demonize the other person as they're trying to kill you. And that's what they're doing. That type of language takes somebody who is already somewhat unstable and justifies in their mind to take action. We have to stop the rhetoric. Both parties have been guilty of it in the past. Because Republicans are in power, some elements of the Democrats, liberal left, are the ones that, and it's not the ones in Congress that I serve with are good people. The ones on the ball field last night, we all circled up at second base where Steve Scalise plays. We knelt and prayed together. We lined up on the field as one team, not Republicans on one side, Democrats on the other. We spread across the field and we locked arms. Why? Because we're all human beings. We may have different ideas, we may have different districts, different philosophies, but let's weigh those differences on the House floor in debate, not on a ball field in gunfire. And we have to settle down the rhetoric on both sides. Just this week, an organization has taken totally out of context something I said and has sent out mass emails to tell people to call me, and that's from the right side. But they never called and asked, what did you really mean by this? They just took the opportunity and the advantage to assess something that's totally wrong and put me in the position. So now I've got to go defend my Second Amendment values. I thought that was pretty clear where I was. The rhetoric's got to stop, and we got to take a breath and think before we act.
We're seeing a lot of this in the 6th district race with both candidates admitting they're threatened on an almost daily basis. Just last night, FBI's in Karen Handel's neighborhood because of some letters her and her neighbors received. What do you make of what's happening in that race? Is it really a lot of what we're talking about?
It's fear.
Here?
It's fear that has been instigated to make people to move emotionally, not logically. You cannot honestly believe that Karen Handel wants to kill people. Why would somebody put that out there? I mean, she may support a policy that is different than what you think, and you may think, wrongly, but you may think that her idea on health care, which this is based on, would restrict your access to health care. It wouldn't, but you may think that. But does that equate her to a murderer? No. This is just to incite emotion with people, to make an emotional decision. And this is the type of thing that leads certain unstable people to take, it allows them to justify an irrational action in their mind. This guy that was out there, his goal was to eradicate Republicans. He asked one of our team members who was leaving practice early before he got his gun, are these Republicans or Democrats? He said, they're Republicans. He knew this was our last practice. He knew it was his last chance. He had stalked out the location. He had actually planned out his attack. This wasn't a heat of the moment thing. He had planned to kill Republicans because he had been incited by rhetoric.
Are we able to overcome the environment we're in
Absolutely.
now,
But we have to be willing to start. Somebody has to start. The right can't wait on the left to start, and the left can't wait on the right to start. That's what we tried to show on the ball field yesterday. We're going to come together in Congress. Are we going to disagree? Absolutely. I'll do everything I can to stop bad policy that I believe is bad policy, but I won't demonize another human being, another American, another citizen of the United States to do that. I'll take them to task on the policy, but I won't call them evil. I can call their ideas wrong, but I will not attack their character, and I will not try to demonize them to the people of America.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
This is America, and we're stronger than this. We're better than this. We need to go back to the idea of statesmanship, brotherly love, and tolerance. We're not seeing very much tolerance for other ideas. I asked some folks that were attacking me recently on certain ideas, and I said, do you actually feel you're tolerant? And they said, oh yes, we're tolerant. I said, so you'll be accepting of my ideas are different than you? And they're like, absolutely not. We don't accept bigotry, and they don't have any idea about me. We have to get over that. I think most people in America want the same thing. A land that's free, safe, and full of opportunity. But we're arguing over what road we're going to take to get there before we've even defined that we all agree on the same thing.